Welcome to the Pardes channel. Today, we explain Prophets Joshua chapter 3 in a clear and simple way, step by step. We're going to take a magnifying glass to the simple, plain meaning of the text, what we call the Peshat, and follow the narrative exactly as it unfolds, right there in the Hebrew Bible. We're literally standing on the edge of the Jordan River with the children of Israel, looking at this monumental transition. No deep symbolic interpretations, no hidden codes today. We're just focusing on the pure, powerful events of the text.
So, here's how we're going to methodically break down this chapter today. First, context and the journey. Then, preparing to cross over. Third, God speaks to Joshua. Fourth, instructions to the people. Fifth, the miracle at the Jordan. And finally, we'll wrap up with some practical life lessons.
Okay, let's dive right into section 1, context and the journey.
First things first, let's establish exactly where we are in the text as the chapter opens up. The narrative doesn't just begin with a sudden, chaotic rush into the water. It actually starts with deliberate movement and a period of waiting. In verse 1, the text tells us that Joshua rises early in the morning. He, along with all the children of Israel, physically packs up their massive encampment from a place called Shittim. They journey directly to the banks of the Jordan River. But, and this is key, they don't cross immediately. The verse explicitly states that they lodged there before they passed over. They set up camp right at the brink of this major geographical obstacle. Just imagine the scene for a second. An entire nation looking across these rushing waters toward Jericho, taking time to pause before the absolute most significant step in their generational journey.
And verses 1 and 2 tell us they didn't just sleep there for one night and then march right in. No, they waited there for 3 full days. I mean, think about the tension and the anticipation building up over a 3-day wait at the edge of a flooded river. After this mandatory pause, the text says that the officers went through the midst of the camp. The waiting period is officially over, and the logistical commands are about to be distributed to the entire nation.
Moving on to section 2, preparing to cross over. Let's see how this builds, because the instructions the officers deliver are incredibly specific. They're entering a totally unknown phase, right? So they need a foolproof system for moving forward. Now, what's really fascinating about this moment is how the people are told to move. In verse 3, the instruction is crystal clear. The people absolutely must wait for a specific visual cue before they break camp. The officers command them, "When ye see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, and the priests, the Levites, bearing it, then ye shall remove from your place and go after it." They aren't following some military general in a chariot. They are strictly ordered to keep their eyes on the ark and follow it.
Now, just to clarify what we're talking about in the plainest terms possible, the Ark of the Covenant is the absolute holiest object in the Israelite camp. It's the physical vessel that houses the tablets of the law. And according to the text, it is to be carried strictly by the priests, the Levites. Up until this chapter, the Ark usually rested in the center of the camp. But now, it physically takes the lead, marching right ahead of the people into this unknown and seemingly dangerous territory.
Verse 4 then gives exact spatial directions, and honestly, this brilliantly illustrates the practical nature of the text. The command is to keep a massive space of about 2,000 cubits between the people and the ark. Just to put that into perspective using modern measurements, 2,000 cubits is roughly 1,000 yards. That's over half a mile. The text explicitly commands them, "Come not near unto it." But why this enormous gap? Well, the text gives us the exact reason, that ye may know the way by which ye must go, for you have not passed this way heretofore. Think about it. If the crowd pressed up close to the ark, only the folks in the front row would be able to see it. By creating this half-mile buffer, the ark is elevated and completely visible to the massive multitude behind it, acting as an unmistakable compass for a path they have never walked before.
Then in verse 5, Joshua steps forward and addresses the people with a very brief but incredibly powerful command. "Sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you." Notice he doesn't tell them to go sharpen their swords or build a bunch of boats. He tells them to consecrate or prepare themselves physically and spiritually. The text is setting up the reality that this crossing will not be achieved by human engineering. It's going to be divine intervention. The people have to be in a state of reverence to witness the wonders promised for the very next day. Right after this, in verse 6, Joshua instructs the priests, "Take up the Ark of the Covenant and pass on before the people," and they comply, immediately moving into position.
Which brings us to section 3, God speaks to Joshua. Let's move right along to verse 7 and see how God's direct communication builds Joshua's authority. Up until this point, Joshua's been the one giving orders, but now the text pivots to a private, absolutely crucial dialogue between the Lord and Joshua. In verse 7, God speaks directly to Joshua, revealing the deeper, dual purpose of the impending miracle. The Lord says, "This day will I begin to magnify thee in the sight of all Israel, that they may know that, as I was with Moses, so I will be with thee." Yes, the people obviously need to cross the river, but equally important here is the establishment of Joshua's leadership. God promises to elevate or magnify Joshua in the eyes of the entire nation. This is going to publicly validate him as the true, divinely chosen successor.
So the crucial point here is this explicit textual comparison. The verse states, "As I was with Moses, so I will be with thee." I mean, every single Israelite knew the foundational story of their nation, right? Moses leading the people out of Egypt, which was defined by the miraculous parting of the Red Sea. Now here is Joshua leading the people into the Promised Land, and God is assuring him that a mirroring event is about to happen right here at the Jordan River. God then gives Joshua specific instructions for the priests in verse 8, saying, "When ye are come to the brink of the waters of the Jordan, ye shall stand still in the Jordan."
This takes us to section 4, instructions to the people.
Next, Joshua gathers everyone to relay God's words in verses 9 and 10. He says, "Come hither and hear the words of the Lord your God." Joshua is basically setting the stage here, ensuring that the people understand the theology behind the geography they're about to conquer. In verse 10, Joshua makes a bold declaration. He says, "Hereby ye shall know that the living God is among you, and that he will without fail drive out from before you a very specific list of nations." He lists these 7 exact nations: the Canaanite, and the Hittite, and the Hivite, and the Perizzite, and the Girgashite, and the Amorite, and the Jebusite. The miracle at the water isn't just about getting to the other side. It is physical, undeniable proof that the living God is active among them, essentially guaranteeing their future military success against these deeply entrenched inhabitants.
Verse 11 beautifully emphasizes the vast scope of God's power. Joshua proclaims, "Behold, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth passeth on before you over the Jordan." Notice that specific title used there, Lord of all the earth. He isn't just some local deity of the desert, he is the sovereign over all creation. And that means he has absolute authority to command the raging waters of the Jordan River. Joshua then inserts a brief logistical note in verse 12, telling them to select 12 men, one from each tribe, a command that's actually going to play a critical role in the memorial built in the next chapter. And then in verse 13, he details exactly how the water will stop. He tells them that when the soles of the priests' feet rest in the waters, the downstream flow will be cut off, and the upstream waters will just stand in one solid heap.
And that brings us to section 5, the miracle at the Jordan. This brings us to the absolute climax of the chapter, the crossing itself. The preparations are done, the speeches are over, and it's finally time for action. Let's look really closely at exactly how the text describes this event. Verses 14 and 15 set a highly dramatic scene. The people leave their tents. The priests bear the ark ahead of them. But the text inserts a vital piece of environmental information right here. It notes that the Jordan overfloweth all its banks all the time of harvest. So this wasn't some dry season where the river was a shallow, easily fordable stream. No way. It was at its absolute highest, raging and overflowing its banks. It naturally presented an impassable barrier. Yet, the text says, as soon as the priests who carried the ark reached the river and their feet dipped into the brink of the water, at that exact split second, the physical flow was completely halted. Verse 16 explains the physical mechanics of this miracle with some really precise geographical details. The text states that the waters coming down from above stood and rose up in one heap a great way off at Adam, the city that is beside Zarethan. So, miles upstream, the water essentially hits an invisible dam and just piles up. Meanwhile, the waters that flowed downstream toward the Sea of the Arabah, even the Salt Sea, which we know today as the Dead Sea, were wholly cut off. Because the source was completely blocked upstream, the riverbed in front of the Israelites just completely drained out, leaving an open path. And the text makes sure to note they passed over right opposite Jericho. Verse 17 concludes the narrative action of this chapter with this brilliant, enduring image. And the priests that bore the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan. They didn't hurry across. They literally marched into the dead center of the riverbed and held their ground. The verse continues, while all Israel passed over on dry ground until all the nation were passed clean over the Jordan. The priests anchored the miracle. They held the Holy Ark steady right there in the center of the dry riverbed, providing safety and reassurance until every single man, woman, and child successfully completed the crossing.
Let's move to our final segment, Section 6, Practical Life Lessons.
So, looking strictly at the plain meaning of this text, what practical lessons do we actually learn to improve ourselves? Because the Bible isn't just a history book, right? Its simple, narrative events carry timeless principles for our daily lives. Let's break down 3 key takeaways. First up, we learned the principle that preparation precedes wonders. Remember Joshua's command? Sanctify yourselves. Before the people could experience this massive breakthrough, they had to intentionally prepare and focus themselves. In our own lives, we so often want the wonder, the success, the breakthrough, the resolved conflict, without doing the internal or preparatory work. The text teaches us that we absolutely must be in the right state of readiness to step into the opportunities presented to us.
Second, there's a really profound lesson here in respecting sacred boundaries. The Israelites were commanded to keep a 2,000-cubit distance from the Ark. While we are meant to follow guidance, we must maintain a healthy reverence and a respectful distance for what is holy and sacred. You've heard the saying, familiarity breeds contempt. Well, by stepping back and maintaining perspective, the people were actually able to see the path much more clearly than if they had rushed up and crowded around the Ark. Sometimes, respecting the boundary gives you the exact clarity you need to move forward.
Finally, and perhaps most importantly, we see the absolute necessity of stepping forward first. Think about it. The obstacle, this flooded, raging river, didn't move or dry up while the priests were safely standing on the dry bank. The text specifically says the water stopped after the soles of the priests' feet dipped into the brink of the water. They had to take the physical first step into the very thing they feared before the way was cleared. In life, we often just stand there waiting for the waters to part before we even start walking. This chapter tells us to pick up what we're carrying, walk toward the obstacle, and get our feet wet. Action triggers the breakthrough.
As you face your own obstacles this week, ask yourself, what is your Jordan River? And are you willing to take the first step into the raging water before you expect the path to clear? Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.